Okay, so we want to be careful with everyone's time. So we're going to go ahead and get started because it's the top of the hour. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I am the events coordinator with Library Juice. And I'm just going to say a couple of words of welcome before passing it over to the editors for today's book that we're celebrating and that we're very, very, very excited to be here. I'm excited that you are here. And what brings me here is Library Juice. And we've got several different arms. The first of which is Library Juice Academy, which is online professional development. We have a lot of great courses. You can find more about us at libraryjuiceacademy.com. We also have Library Juice Press, which publishes wonderful books like the one, again, that we're here to celebrate. We also have journals. We have a wonderful collection of titles that we've published over the last 2 decades, as well as great titles coming out all the time. We are an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can find more about us at litwinbooks.com. And then finally, Library Juice Connections, which is our events arm, which allows us to celebrate books. So it allows us to talk about all the topics that we are interested in, those of us in librarianship and archives and special collections, all the adjoining and adjacent fields. So we come together to do these types of things. I'm so glad that you are here again. And to find all the wonderful things we have coming up, all the wonderful recordings that we have, do take a look at libraryjuiceconnections.org. And now, Leah and Hazel, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Hazel, and thank you all of our awesome authors who are here. I'm going to share my screen just for a moment. Hazel and I are not going to take too much time, though, because really the exciting content is to come from all of our chapter authors. We're so excited to introduce this book to you all, though. It's been kind of a labor of love for about 3 years. We've been working on this. I want to give a quick shout out for our cover, too. This very beautiful cover was designed by a librarian who did some artistic pieces inside the book as well, Christina Hilberger. And she's not here in the webinar today, but we just love this so much and appreciate her efforts bringing this title to us. So we want to introduce what Emergent Strategy is, the brief version, so that you all know how to connect the stories we'll hear from our authors to what Emergent Strategy as a philosophy and as a teaching philosophy is.
So Emergent Strategy, it comes from Adrienne Maree Brown. So she really coalesced this set of principles and a set of elements that are Emergent Strategy. They're really based in social change movements. They're based in nature. They're based in the Tao Te Ching. They're based in Afrofuturist fiction that imagines a more just world. Adrienne Maree Brown took all of these pieces and pulled them together to describe how change happens. So a lot of it has to do with change. We initially got interested in it. Like, I had read Emergent Strategy, but Leah had really dug into it and started thinking about Emergent Strategy in terms of library instruction. And I saw her present at a conference where she led these amazing conversations. And I was like blown away by how generative this was and how inspired everybody was by these ideas and making connections between Emergent Strategy and library instruction. And so offhand, I will say, I was like, you should really write a book about this. You should write a book and get lots of stories. And then Leah was like, no, Emergent Strategy already exists as a book. Adrienne Maree Brown wrote the book. We don't need another one. And then like 2 months later, I got an email and she's like, hey, can we talk about that book? And then we talked and we just got so excited about the idea of reaching out and hearing from other folks and hearing how this resonates with them and hearing how you can use Emergent Strategy principles in library instruction to connect better with students and make change. What else is learning but change, right? So that's kind of where we were inspired, what we were inspired by.
And so here's what these principles are. Also, sidebar, we have a rock star in the audience today. Liz Cheneve is the person who introduced me to using Emergent Strategy within one-shot library instruction sessions. There's something very special about the principles in that kind of time-limited space that librarians usually have with students. We don't have a full semester most of the time to get to know students. And so we have to kind of interact these important connective moments in this like time limited space. So for me, these principles really speak to that kind of environment. So I'm not going to read these all to you, but our original book organization and our thought when we put the call for proposals out was tell us your library instruction story, highlighting what principle was at work in that story. And what happened was we got blown away by the content we received back and blown away at how interconnected all of these principles are. So it didn't like organize itself in a strictly, linear pattern. We don't have 9 chapters based on each principle because most of what people told us was like a beautiful combination of all of these principles at work all of the time. The other thing that we think is very interesting about emergent strategy principles in library teaching is that many times you're already doing these things in your work, and it's just a matter of identifying it as this principle in action and then moving forward, being intentional about incorporating it into your teaching. So that's what's been so beautiful about the process too. So I think, Hazel, that's all we wanted to say to set people up, correct? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and hand the mic over to our first author, Vanessa, who's going to speak today. And I know you're all going to just enjoy hearing from everybody as much as I do. Okay, thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, guys. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Arce, and my contribution to this book is actually a reflection piece. It's titled Reframing Library Instruction Towards Belonging. And it's basically a relatively brief essay where I reflect on a small, spontaneous adjustment that I made to an introductory library session for first-year students at my institution. In this essay, I reflect on the potential impact of a relatively minor change in the specific context of the student population at our college. So I work at Lehman College. It's a Hispanic serving institution and minority serving institution located in the Bronx, New York. It's a commuter campus that is part of the City University of New York, which is the city's public university system. And so the majority of our students are Black and brown, first generation students. So like the context of where the setting of the piece is important. And so basically our typical introduction to the library sessions usually include a brief tour of the library, right? We do a walkthrough of the building, etc. And so the change that I made was that one day I decided to instruct the group of students in front of me to visualize themselves using the library, but like really see it in their mind's eye. So as we walked through the library, I instructed them to please just see themselves doing anything, right? A space that we walk through or a service that I described, but really kind of project in their minds their future selves using the library and really see it. And I asked them to remember whatever they saw, because then when we went back into the classroom, the session usually has like the tour and then a library sort of basic introduction to the library website inside the library instruction classroom. So I told them when we go back to the classroom, I would like you to share what you saw, right? So, and then we went on our tour and I did it as usual, etc. Right? So then we went back to the classroom. I asked them to share. And then when they started saying things that they saw themselves doing, like I see myself using a study room, or I see myself, I don't know, using the computers, or, whatever it is that they saw, but one after the other, they started saying these statements out loud. And when they started saying that, it kind of really hit me like, oh my God, this can make a difference for this student population, because, as we know, especially first generation students, the library space may not be necessarily familiar or even welcoming, not just the academic library, but also just college in general, higher education in general. So I really felt in that moment that, oh my God, this has like a lot of potential to kind of foster a sense of belonging from the beginning, right? This is first semester, first year students that we're working with in this particular session, right? So in the piece, I go into more detail on that moment, and then I spend the rest of the time reflecting on some of the ideas that kind of led me to that moment. Like, it didn't happen in a vacuum. At that time, I was engaged actually as a participant in my institution's writing across the curriculum. They had a year-long seminar, and the theme that year was anti-racist pedagogy. And so we were doing all these readings. We were reading Bell Hooks and Bettina Love. And so at that point, when that moment happened, I was very immersed in those ideas and discussions with the other participants in the seminar. And so I believe that that's kind of where that emerged from. Funnily enough, I had not read Adrienne Maree Brown or was not familiar with Emergent Strategy at all until I saw the call for proposals for this book. And like Leah and Hazel mentioned, like, I recognized it. I said, oh, that's something I'm doing. And especially the principle of small is all, small is good really felt compelling because I felt like it truly applied to that experience. And so since that moment happened and I started incorporating that practice more and more into the sort of the typical library session, I really felt like I wanted to share that. I wanted to write about it. My colleagues also felt like, yeah, you should write about that. My boss was trying to get me to turn it into like a research project, but it felt like the scholarly sort of language and the scholarly sort of like framework of like a peer-reviewed journal article didn't feel right for what I wanted to express. So when I saw the call for proposals, it's like something clicked, like, oh my God, like this feels like a proper venue for what I want to say. And then, once I got the proposal was accepted and I actually read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown, it felt like, yes, it confirmed, like, yeah, that freedom of form that Leah and Hazel encouraged. Obviously, it's coming from Brown's sort of like the way that she wrote her books, etc. It felt really right. Like, it was like the perfect setting for what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. So yeah, so I'm very grateful for that. And so yeah, that's all I have to share. Look forward to answering questions later if people have them. Thank you for listening, and I will pass it over to Samantha Koenig-Geiser.
Thanks, Vanessa. I'm Samantha Koenig-Geiser. I am the Student Success Librarian at the Paul Robeson Library at Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey. We are by far the smallest campus in the Rutgers system, with a heavy first-generation population, which are the students that I was working with for this project. So my chapter is titled Drawing into Conversation, Centering Students in Library Orientations with Art and Discussion. And speaking of change, this chapter grew out of a kind of sudden request, a last-minute request, where I had to completely rethink my summer library orientation for our EOF first-gen students. So someone asked me, I need you to do an orientation. It's 2 different sessions, 50 students each, which is large for us. And by the way, you're not going to be in the library, and you're going to be in a room with no computers and like pretty shoddy internet access. So of course I said yes and just freaked out privately about what I was supposed to do to make these students even care about the library when I had like none of the resources I would have relied on to make it active or not. So I went into it, and instead of saying like, okay, I want to deliver the same information in a new format, I was like, let's throw it all out. Like, the students are the ones in the room. How do I just make it about them? Like, let's figure out a way to reveal what they actually need from that orientation, knowing that like, because the students in the room are different each time, that orientation might look different each time, and that's okay. So I went through our supply closet, like, okay, what can I reasonably carry across campus? And, the easiest thing is paper, crayons, and pencils. So I went in with art supplies. I had read Emergent Strategy a few years before this, and I'd thought about it a lot in my life outside of work, and I had just never made that connection to like, this fits in with librarianship. But in the process of doing this orientation, I realized like I had read it, I had absorbed it so much that it was kind of naturally showing up in my work. Like it just was part of my subconscious at that point. So kind of like Vanessa, when I saw this call for chapters, I was like, oh, right, that is what I did. And it just seemed to like fit together really nicely. So The orientation approach that I developed, it is grounded in emergent strategy, although at the time I was not realizing that so much. But particularly the way Brown, she kind of looks at effective facilitation, and it's like, it's not so much about controlling like learning outcomes or something like that. And it's more about how do you create conditions in the room to have meaningful interaction. So how do you make meaning out of like what's happening in the room? So instead of imposing an agenda, we're now responding to what's happening in the room and putting in a lot of trust that you and your participants are going to shape the experience to what it has to be. Which, I mean, it is scary to me to do that because you're trusting a bunch of new students to want to participate in that and also trust you when they've never met you and you only have an hour. So it was a little panic inducing for me. But when I went in with my art supplies. I built a little rapport for a few minutes. And then I asked the students to, on a piece of paper, draw whatever came to mind when I said the word library or libraries, like whatever came up. It could be words. If like you really hate drawing, that's fine. Jot some words down, doodle, whatever it is. My hope was that it would then kind of uncover areas of conversation that we could have, that like whatever was coming up, that would be a place to go, a path to follow for library orientation. So I gave them, maybe 10 minutes to draw. I had music playing. And at the end, their drawings were very revealing with both some very expected stuff, but then also some surprising elements as well. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of books. A lot of silence, many shushing librarians with like kind of angry eyebrows, and some like scenes of environments that looked rigid to me. But then there were also scenes that reflected a lot of comfort and nostalgia, and then some others with a little bit more anxiety in there. So I invited students to talk about their drawings in whatever way they were comfortable, however much they wanted to share. And I just let the conversation go. I didn't like immediately go into correcting some of the perceptions that I wasn't wanting them to go in with, but just kind of letting the conversation flow with me and with each other. So I think this is where emergent strategy really started to take shape in my practice, because I wasn't trying to predict what students would need. I was just letting their responses generate what was going to come next. The conversation was just meant to be organic. So this is very much related to Brown's principle that there's a conversation in that room that needs to happen and you have to find it. And this was a way to reveal what that conversation had to be. So as the students shared, I was kind of learning what was mattering to them or what was on their minds. And I was also obviously able to use what I knew about our library to guide them a little bit. So when we were talking about books, that conversation kind of shifted into a conversation about access. When they were talking a lot about like silence and quiet, we talked a little bit about like different spaces supporting different needs, because silence is certainly a part of libraries. It's just not the whole story. And then a lot of the shushing librarian conversations, it was funny. It injected some humor into the conversation, which was really good also for building trust with us. But it also gave me the chance to kind of reframe that to like librarians as helpers and not shushers. So at the end of like those first two orientations, we really did end up covering almost all of the information I would have covered anyway in just a slightly different way. There was some stuff that didn't get hit on, which was fine. They'll learn it eventually. But it was all responsive rather than prescriptive. And it was based entirely on what students were coming in with and then me responding to that. So after this conversation, I had them draw again. I said, okay, now we've talked for 20 minutes. We've gotten to know each other a little bit. I'm going to put music on again, draw again. Well, what are you thinking about now? What's coming to mind when I say libraries? And even in this short amount of time, there was a definite change, a definite shift, both in the drawings that I reviewed kind of side by side afterwards and also in the conversations that we were having. And I'll show a couple pictures right at the end. I think I'm still within 5 minutes, I hope. So the shushing library pretty much disappeared at the end. Thank goodness. I was very happy about that. There was a lot of like little chat bubbles saying like, how can I help you? Welcome to the library. There were still a lot of drawings of books, but now they were like kind of in this context of access or connecting or like talking to other people. Like the access part really hit them in a way that I didn't even realize from the first conversation. So it was just like, it was a really fruitful conversation, and it was just an enjoyable orientation, I think, for all of us. But what emergent strategy was really helping me understand, especially in reflecting on this, was that the quality of that session was depending on how can I build a relationship in this hour? And not even with active learning, that's not always building a relationship. This conversation was really what helped me do that. And it was also a lesson in like really learning to trust students and myself to just let that happen. And that if it didn't work, it didn't work. There's other things we can do, but it was a learning experience, I think, for all of us. But that using emergent strategy to build trust and facilitate connection, I think is particularly important with our new students. That's a population that really needs that too. I'm going to very quickly share my screen just so you can see some of these drawings that came out. I made like little collages of them because there were obviously like 100. I'm not going to show you 100 drawings, don't worry. Okay, so I think you should see this. So this was our the pre-drawings before our conversation. This was a lot of the books we were seeing. So like bookshelves, book stacks, book world came up. Some people wrote like Barnes and Noble. So a lot of book stuff. We also had these are all the shushing librarians. Don't be loud, quiet, just yelling. Lots of S's in that shush we were seeing. And then there were some also on like about focus and learning. And then fewer of these, but there was a lot that looked at nostalgia. If you were a kid that grew up in a library, you probably remember your library's rug. I know I do. That came up a lot too. Which that's in the chapter, but that gave us a lot of good conversation about the transition to college, which was really, really nice. So then these drawings are for now after that conversation we had. And luckily we've got now a lot of librarians smiling and saying, let me help you. And I'm here to help, which was wonderful to see. I hope that stuck with them for 4 years. And then this is, they illustrated a lot about community too, which some of the learning and focus stuff was then like kind of transitioned to like learning within a group, almost like some more collaboration was coming out. And then this is the book one. So we still had a lot about books, but it just changed from like a single book that just said book world to like, this is an access, this is global, this is people connecting with 2 books. So the focus on access was really important to me too. And I think that's all the illustrations I have for my chapter. But thank you so much. So yeah, writing this chapter was amazing. Hazel and Leah were absolutely wonderful to let us do this. So I am now going to pass the mic to Christina Clement.
All right, thanks, Samantha. Those drawings are so cool. I can't wait to get my copy of the book and look at this a little bit closer. So hi, everyone. I'm Christina Clement. I'm the Assistant Director of Academic Engagement and Instruction for our collegiate librarians at the Kennesaw State University Libraries. And we're in Georgia, just north of Atlanta. And I wrote the chapter titled The Power of Presence, Transforming Teaching by Letting Go. And it addresses the core principle of less prep, more presence. So when I first saw this call for book chapters, I was thinking back, and I'm pretty sure I knew a little bit about emergent strategy, but I hadn't really looked into it further. I had previously seen Liz present about it, and I was definitely intrigued. It went on my to-do list, but as things tend to do, it fell off my to-do list. So when Leah and Hazel sent out this call, I finally got around to looking it up, and I realized that I had been practicing emergent strategy in my instruction sessions for quite some time. And one moment in particular really stood out to me, and that was the day that I threw away my lesson plan and went into an instruction session with nothing to guide me. And so I wrote about that and the engaging and meaningful activity about the research process that kind of ended up shaping itself because it was given room to breathe. So when I proposed the telling of this story for the book, I wasn't really quite sure how the story would take shape. But as I wrote it, I realized I couldn't just describe what I did and why I did it. I wanted the readers to walk a little bit in my shoes. So I ended up doing a little bit of creative writing, and that is very much not my wheelhouse when it comes to writing, but I did it. And then I provided a step-by-step lesson plan of the activity that came out of that session that day. And so even though I don't consider myself a creative writer, I think that this chapter turned out pretty well, and I'd like to read you 2 excerpts. So the beginning of my story, and then one of my little paragraphs where I reflect a little bit after the fact. So This is The Power of Presence, Transforming Teaching by Letting Go by Christina Clement. Move, move, move. Some days it took every ounce of willpower to drag myself out of my office and down to the instruction classroom. That day in the fall of 2019 was one of those days. I practically had to beg my legs to carry me downstairs. Not another database demo, I sighed, trudging down the hallway. Do I really have to do this again? What if I just didn't show up? But I pushed those thoughts aside, knowing I'd only feel worse if I didn't go. And I'd probably get in trouble. The walk from my third floor office to the instruction room felt like it stretched on forever, each step weighed down by a mental checklist that I could complete in my sleep. Lesson plan, worksheets, minute-by-minute schedule. And for a while, that standardization had been comforting, especially since it had been years since I'd planned lessons. But lately, the structured format had begun to feel stifling, like a boa constrictor tightening around any spark of creativity I still had. 1 year into my first professional librarian role, and I was already feeling burnt out on instruction. I like order, schedules even, but this was something else. The lesson plan had to map to the ACRL Information Literacy Competency Standards, which were outdated by several years, and that was a frustration only the newest librarians seemed to share. But that was a rant for another day. As I neared the classroom, my eyes caught the recycling bin, and for a fleeting moment, an idea flickered. Could I just drop everything and wing it? This is ridiculous, I thought, but my hands seemed to act of their own accord. Without another second of hesitation, I tossed all my papers, the lesson plan, database demo notes, worksheets, syllabus, straight into the recycling bin. Empty-handed, I stepped into the classroom, my pulse racing as I realized what I'd done. Now I'm going to leave you in suspense there about what happened next and how the session unfolded. So you will have to check out the book for the rest of that. And next, I'd like to share one of my little reflective statements that comes towards the end of the chapter. So at the time, I thought the lesson I'd improvised that day was something completely new, something groundbreaking and unique. It wasn't. Many librarians use similar activities to help students navigate the research process. But what made that day pivotal for me, though, was the realization that I didn't always have to prepare down to the smallest detail. Some sessions truly benefit from a carefully structured plan, where every moment has its place. But others, especially those about big ideas like approaching research, need room to breathe, to explore. I began to see that sometimes the most meaningful learning happens when we step back and give space for conversation and discovery. So the rest of my chapter does lay out the full lesson plan of this research process activity that I came up with, where we use Post-its to map out the research process. It's a lot of fun. And I was a little disheartened to realize I did not invent this, but I still use it to this day when it's appropriate. And for me, this chapter was a complete joy to write. I'm really thankful to Leah and Hazel for letting me flex a creative muscle that I was not so sure that I had. I don't know if I'll do much more creative writing after this, but maybe someday someone can talk me into it. And since that fateful day, I have put a lot less emphasis on being over-prepared and over-planned, and I now focus more on meaning, conversation, and engagement in my instruction sessions. And I think that I benefit from these practices just as much as the students do, and it means that I don't dread dragging myself to the classroom anymore. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Library Juice Connections for hosting. And above all, big thanks to Leah and Hazel for providing us with this space so that we can really sit with emergent strategy and explore how it intersects with our pedagogical practices and values. So with that, I'm going to pass it to the next author, Mary Ruggie.
Hi, I'm Mary Ruggie. I am from Grand Valley State University in Michigan. So as a liaison librarian, I'm often asked into class once, maybe twice a semester. And because I believe that relationships in the classroom are built on trust, and trust takes time, something I do not have a lot of, I'm always looking for ways to create connection with students. And I prefer the classroom to be a more equitable space, but I also understand the built-in hierarchies that come along with student-educator relationship in academia. So I look for things that flip the script. And this is why I became interested in emergent strategy. It approaches learning and growth in a more holistic way, taking into consideration a person's flaws and the struggle that often precedes a breakthrough. This is also why the idea of mindfulness in the classroom appealed to me. So all the literature I was reading talked about using mindfulness in the form of meditation during class, but it was mainly being used in health and education sources. So it took me a while to understand how to incorporate it into an information literacy lesson, but I found an angle that rang true to me and didn't involve me shoehorning this practice into a presentation. You'll have to read the chapter to see how I came to this conclusion, but it required a lot of patience and pausing on my part, which is a tenet of emergent strategy. But basically, I saw mindfulness and meditation as this liminal space, a time of silence filled with purpose. So I decided a lesson that could really benefit from this liminal space was one I taught on citation politics that deals with how and why academia excludes marginalized voices in research and scholarship, effectively whitewashing our curriculums. So inserting mindfulness into this lesson was pretty easy. Again, you'll have to read the chapter to see how I did it. But the few times I used this in class, I noticed most, if not all, of the engagement came from white students. Now, I didn't read much into this until I enrolled in a faculty learning circle here at my university about trauma-sensitive mindfulness. This is where I learned that when we ask someone with trauma to pay close, sustained attention to their inner world, meditation, we invite them into contact with traumatic stimuli, thoughts, images, memories, physical sensations that may relate to a traumatic event for them. So while the content of my citation politics lesson wasn't re-traumatizing for me because I never experienced race-based discrimination, I didn't think about the fact that it could be re-traumatizing for others. In my chapter, I reflect on this realization, saying I felt ashamed that I hadn't already clocked my mindfulness lesson as a potentially traumatic event for some, and I was fearful that I'd already hurt somebody. I immediately stopped doing the lesson altogether. To me, it was worth educating people about this. It wasn't worth educating people about this if there was even a risk of one person getting hurt. A big part of me wanted to never teach it again, but another part knew that the lesson was important because after we would address the problem, we would discuss solutions. And the solutions would inspire action, which is how we combat hopelessness in a situation that may seem too big. And this is what made me push pause on the lesson instead of self-destruct. And I believe there was a way to include mindfulness that would keep students safe. I just needed to learn more about being trauma sensitive before I went back to the proverbial drawing board. Looking back on this inwardly tumultuous time, I understand my decision to pause came from a place of knowing and not a place of fear. It may have started out as fear of hurting someone, but it became an equation I just didn't have the answer to at the time. I knew the lesson was worth teaching, but I needed to learn more to finish that equation. In emergent strategy speak, this is what I think Adrienne Marie Brown meant when she advised us to, quote, move the speed of trust. The way she explained it and the way I understood it was that moving at the speed of trust means prioritizing connection with people over what my end goal was. So I focus on the connections. Where were they? Where did they need to be? It took me a while, but I realized I did what a lot of eager educators do. I inserted myself into the equation. This is why it didn't add up. I kept trying to connect the students to myself through what I was teaching, but in this case, I did not belong there. Asking students to consider me in their understanding of how citation politics affects them just didn't make sense. So, after removing myself as an integer, I was left with the question, what connection was I trying to make? How could I build trusting relationships without inserting myself and my own goals? I hope you read the rest of the chapter to see how I accomplished this, but I will be passing the baton on to my fellow author, Chloe Robb.
Thank you so much. I'm Chloe Robb, and the title of the chapter that I co-authored with Bernadette Floresca is Small is All, Teaching DIY Feminism in Libraries and Archives. And our chapter was inspired by a series of events and talks that Bernadette and I put on at the Newcomb Archives and Voorhoff Collection at Tulane University between 2022 and 2025. And also about a week-long immersive pre-college course for high school students that we also taught together through the Newcomb Archives. And I thought I would kind of, for a starting point to talk about it today, so I was realizing that it's almost exactly the 4-year anniversary of where I open our chapter, because this was inspired by, first by, I think, an event, or I don't know if we call it an event at that juncture, but by something that we put on in the wake of the Dobbs v. Jackson Supreme Court decision in June of 2022. And this series of then events that kind of grew out of there and then eventually evolved into a full class. And so we talk about these events in our chapter, and we frame it with the context of a breakdown of what DIY feminism is, based largely on the work of Red Chijay, which kind of identifies these various tenets that can loosely be associated with DIY feminism. And then we integrate those within the principles of emergent strategy. And we had read Emergent Strategy and just felt like it layered really well over the work we were trying to do here. Particularly around the tenets of small is all, which obviously is in our chapter title, but also less prep, more presence. Because a lot of this, it wasn't something that we necessarily planned to have happen. And then it became, this really, really beloved part of our work that we were able to do many times over again. And so I'll share a little bit from our chapter. And then we'll kind of circle back on where we're at now and what we're thinking about now. But Newcomb Archives, to give a little bit of background, is based at Tulane University, and it's an archive that documents the history of women, gender, and feminist movements in the Gulf South. The collections encompass administrative documents, early speeches, notes, photographs, but also a lot of unconventional records like original artwork, political ephemera like posters and buttons, homemade videos, T-shirts. And so to dive in a little bit to our writing, we identify these materials as evidence of DIY feminism, an umbrella term that encompasses a grassroots localized feminist response to capitalism and political authority. As feminist memory workers, our intention is that the archive, referring to both material collections and a physical place for learning and discovery, should serve as a living lab for the purpose of sustaining, sharing, and producing feminist culture. The layered experience of interacting with feminist archives inverts a mandate to preserve archival records in service of scholars and their research pursuits, shifting priority to the creation and circulation of ideas, actions, and contemporary cultural interventions. As Kate Eichhorn writes, rather than a destination for knowledge is already produced or a place to recover histories and ideas placed under erasure, the making of archives is frequently where knowledge production begins. And so then to kind of jump back into what the scene was. So we were in the midst at that time of working with our colleagues who were teaching summer courses for high school students in a pre-college program that focused on gender and social justice advocacy. And we were offering them experiences within the archives. And so we decided we kind of needed to build, given what the climate was in terms of what the students were experiencing and how they were processing what was happening, in our judicial system. We felt like we wanted to give them a space both to kind of integrate the materials they've been working with throughout the week, but also to be able to process their own experience of history as it was, being made, but through the lens of being able to look back and sort of see what the process had been that had come before them. So we set up a section of our reading room with art supplies, craft materials, and we invited students to create their own original feminist media inspired by our collections and their own lived experiences. At the end of the week, we hosted what would be the first of many crafternoon sessions at the Newcomb Archives. inspired in part by AAR Gallery's reproductive justice themed edition of their annual postcard show, My Body, My Choice. AAR Gallery was founded in September 1972, several months prior to the landmark Roe v. Wade decision. The postcard show is an annual call to hundreds of artists to come together in support of the gallery by donating postcard-sized works of any medium. The original works are then sold in gallery with proceeds benefiting AAR and their mission to support and advance the work of women and non-binary artists. On the morning of June 24th, in the wake of the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision, we delivered the original postcard artworks that had been created by the students to the post office to be sent to the gallery in New York City, and we retained digital surrogates with the creators' permissions. Despite the bitterness of knowing that their makers might know fewer reproductive rights in their lifetimes than their ancestors, we acknowledged the significance of holding space for young people to be in relationship with archives, to be in relationship with each other, and with their potential for creating a feminist legacy that reaches beyond the imaginings and limitations of the present. As Adrienne Marie Brown states, reflecting on lessons embodied in the work of Octavia Butler, a visionary exploration of humanity includes imagination. By engaging with DIY feminist material culture in its many forms, and with feminist practices of archiving, memory keeping, and cultural information production, and through the creation of their own feminist activist media, the students became agentic constructors of collective and individual feminist identities that reflected not only their own experiences within our current reality, but also the world that they envision bringing into being. And we shared some visuals of the artworks that were created by the students, as well as them working in the space, as well as some of the materials that they interacted with that inspired these works in our chapter. And I think reflecting back, one thing that Bernadette and I might both want to highlight is that, and for many of us here who work in archives, so much of the teaching work that we do is inspired by place and by collections and by these tangible locations that we are within. And I'll note that neither Bernadette and I are with the Newcomb Archives anymore. And we have continued to talk about and present our work in other venues. And I think that's something that the two of us are really kind of pondering over now, particularly, how do we continue to kind of evolve and carry forward this energy that came out of this moment when we're no longer actually rooted within the collection, and kind of knowing, we're still tangential to the collection, and that we know it's still there and it's inspiring others for the future, but where do we kind of take that from here? And so that's something that I think we're really interested in pondering at this moment. But our chapter was just a really wonderful way to kind of reflect on this particular time. And we include in it our syllabus eventually we created a full course of our own that integrated all these principles and gave students all these opportunities to meet with different artists and makers and create their own DIY feminist activist media and kind of think about how that fits into documenting feminist legacy. With that, I'll pass on to the next folks. I'll pass the baton to Christina Bush and to Joanna Gray. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. Hi, I'm Joanna Gray. I'm a student success librarian for Tisch Library at Tufts University. And as part of my job, I provide instruction and support for first-year writing students. And my work is also focused around outreach and orientation initiatives and supporting transfer and first-generation and traditionally underrepresented students.
Hi, I'm Christina Bush. I'm the Library Experience Manager at Boston University Libraries. And my role focuses on early career undergraduate experience, from instruction to reference to orientations and engagement. I was previously at Tufts University, serving as the online learning librarian at the Tisch Library with Joanna in the former user experience and student success department. So our piece is titled Meeting Emergent First Year Needs with Emergent Strategy, Adapting to Change and Making Time for Presence. Our piece is about harnessing emergent strategy principles to collaboratively redesign our first year writing lesson plan. Our chapter walks through our redesign process, starting from assessment of the previous lesson plan and our rationale behind beginning the project, through our collaborative process to create the new lesson plan, and how emergent strategy influenced our work. We'll start by reading a passage from our chapter that explains the why behind engaging with this redesign project through an emergent strategy lens.
Thus, we set a goal to emphasize the messiness of research and reinforce that students will get stuck, which is not a failure. The new lesson plan must provide space where this point is explicit. Brainstorming, experimenting, and mistakes must be visible, totally normal, and expected during class. We wanted to build connections and create a welcoming environment where students could feel comfortable reaching out to library staff when they hit roadblocks and need support. These concepts called for an emergent strategy approach, specifically, never a failure, always a lesson. Emergent strategy could be used as a tool to mitigate library anxiety and the stressful nature of a one-shot. It could help us build a lesson plan focused on topics and concepts that resonate with each class while still centering our learning outcomes. Employing emergent strategy principles could help us to meet students in a time of unmanageable stress and try to alleviate it by making research less scary and more focused around their particular needs, while sharing information literacy strategies that will serve them beyond their time as first-year writing students.
Emergent strategy was infused throughout our entire process, from informing how we made space for the right work in our collaboration to the way that we wanted to show up in the classroom and focus on the conversation in the room. The principles helped us to create a sustainable and flexible lesson plan that fosters genuine presence in the classroom, bringing students' needs and interests to the forefront. So Joanna will share another passage now.
So as emergent strategy states, change is constant. Students will only continue changing, as will their needs, interests, and the tools and products that we use as librarians for instruction. The lesson plan that we developed works both in person and online and is flexible enough so that it can be used for classes with differing levels of library research experience, prior library instruction experience, and diverse research assignment topics. It provides students with opportunities to cultivate multiple ways of knowing and making meaning through mind mapping and individual and collective reflection opportunities. In the workshop, they will experiment, play, and run into roadblocks. We may also run into sticking points in our examples, but not having set examples makes the instruction more engaging. We demonstrate the principle of never a failure, always a lesson in the classroom as we experiment with keyword search strings based on the topics suggested by students. So we're excited to share this chapter and the lesson plan itself with you. It's included in the end of our chapter. And since publishing, Christina and I have both continued to use this lesson plan in our different institutional contexts. As time has passed, we've both adapted the plan to address other factors, including Gen AI, changing curricula, and student needs. And we hope that you'll try it out and let us know how it goes. So we're now happy to pass the baton to our next author, Eri Caswell.
Thank you. And also very true to emergent strategy form, I am gonna kind of throw out the script that I made for myself and kind of just talk to you about where the chapter came from for me and hopefully pique a little interest so that you would like to read. So my chapter's title is called Writing in the Commons. Emergent strategies to facilitate public library writing groups. So I wanted to put out there up front that my chapter is very focused on my experiences before coming to academic librarianship as a public librarian. And I had gone through many years of this sort of iterative process of approaching and reapproaching these community writing groups. My background is from creative writing. And I thought about an MFA route, and I always joke and say I tripped and fell and woke up in libraries and had a successful and happy career there, luckily. But what struck me about the call for proposals was two things. First thing was that I had literally just closed the book, within the week before I saw the call for submissions. I had just closed Adrienne Marie Brown's book, and I had already been like a lot of folks have talked about kind of mulling over a lot of these principles and thinking about mostly in more of like a community organizing context. Like it hadn't even occurred to me to think about emergent strategy in terms of like what we do in the library and how we teach and how we instruct. And it just opened up such a door for me to really dive into this process of reflecting on what I've actually been doing in the writing groups as a facilitator and as an instructor. And it was such a rich and meaningful process just doing that for myself. I'm like, this was my first chapter that I've written in sort of like a professional setting like this. I feel like I've been very spoiled. But what I loved about the experience of writing this was it allowed me to dig into the scholarship and think about um, pedagogy and all these other bigger questions about like linguistic justice. And people arrive to the writing group space with these notions of, I'm not a good writer. I'm not that creative. You know, you constantly hear all of these kind of internal, very like racialized, very gendered, assumptions about themselves as writers, themselves in terms of how other people are going to perceive them and hear them. And it's been such a powerful process of realizing like, yes, we're learning how to write with each other in this space, but kind of more profoundly, we're learning how to like re-relate to each other. And so the more I was thinking about this and digging into it, the more the emergent strategy principles that Adrienne Marie Brown lays out were starting to map really well and elegantly into my consideration of how I was doing this work. And I think the freedom to explore some of the anecdotes, like I loved, I believe it was Christina earlier who said, you know, creative writing is not necessarily like my forte, but using it as like a portal to understand the experience of that moment of her, you know, deciding to throw out the lesson plan into the recycling bin. Like when people have permission to open up those moments for themselves with other people and like they get positive affirmation for that, it's like an extremely powerful and beautiful thing. And what this chapter allowed me to do was actually go into some of those moments and like offer them up. So it just helps you feel the significance. As I was able to write this and really intentionally come into the writing group facilitation role, like how am I practicing this? Like I think one of the most powerful anecdotes to come out of this in the time since writing it was I made this transition to try to do something like this in an academic setting, and it's been harder. It's a stranger setting. It's not. It's you know it's a work in progress. But one of the real practices that came out of writing this is this idea of like basically when people come to a writing group, it can look like and be so many different things. It can be structured so many ways. So it was kind of like, all right, we're going to make a menu. Like, what do you want to do when you're here? Like, why are you actually here? And from those needs, we can build a structure for our meetings that like works for you. And I was just like really on it that day. I was like, oh, this is going so well. I feel so good. I feel so in my element. And at the end, somebody came up to me and you know, the energy was really good. And she was like, I and sort of like blown away. I've never done something like this before in like a professional development space. And she was like, I feel extremely seen and heard right now. And it like honestly, leaving the room was making me super emotional because that to me is like the power of what this is when we're practicing it intentionally and bringing it. It's like we're not just trying to teach people a thing. We're like trying to be in space with them, relate with them, and just, I don't know, make these moments where meaning can be held together. That's very exciting and important to me. So I hope you read the chapter. I had a really great time writing it. And I would like to now introduce Stacy Rolston Wayland for the next chapter to discuss.
Perfect. Thank you. You said my name accurately. So my name is Stacy, and I'm an adjunct librarian working at several Southern California community colleges. And I wrote the chapter Crafting with Care, a phenomenological reflection on library instruction. So this particular lesson that I had taught was very early into my teaching experience. I'm a pretty new librarian. I've only been a librarian for a few years. And I was very meticulous. I had my lesson plan. There was no diverting from the plan because that would be failure. So I needed to make sure that, my 45 minutes to an hour of teaching them absolutely everything that they would need to know during a one-shot session on information literacy, because I believe so deeply in these concepts and how important they are to education. I wanted to make sure that I got to absolutely every element. And of course, that doesn't leave room for anything else. No questions, no diversion. But I really did kind of see diversion as failure at the time. And I do talk a little bit about my own imposter syndrome, which impacts my feelings about that. But in this particular lesson that I discuss in my chapter, I was getting, sleepy nighttime students actually engaging and asking questions. And initially my reaction was to, shut it down. But as we all know, as librarians, shutting it down could equate to never seeing them again. So I went with it, right? And it was really a small experience, but it was really impactful on my teaching and how I saw myself as an educator. You were just talking about permission, and I definitely felt like my experience with this and then equating it and reflecting with Adrienne Maree Brown's Emergent Strategy gave me permission to see myself as an educator. Whereas before it was kind of like, I could be an educator as long as I do everything perfectly. So, I really resonated this experience with being like water. Change is constant. And, this has really impacted my teaching so drastically. Because I just, every time I go into one of these sessions, whether it is a one shot session for, a subject course, or I teach unit library technician courses as well, really allowing the students, to go where they want to go. And understanding, somebody else said earlier, they're going to learn what they need to learn, as long as, I think it's really important giving them that space to explore. So in this chapter, I kind of started off with this idea of teaching as being witchcraft, which is a lot of fun, and it really is how I kind of view it in the beginning. It's how I viewed it, and I still do, as this idea of creating spells. So you're taking all your different ingredients, your slide decks, all your instructional materials, your methods, and you're putting this together in a recipe that hopefully resonates with everybody. So that's where the crafting comes in. And then something else I wanted to do specifically for this reflection was to look at it through the lens of phenomenology, which allows you to look closely at the lived experience. So the lived experience of teaching as a librarian. I wanted to see what it feels like to prepare for instruction, enter the classroom, to read the room, respond to students, and reflect afterward on what had happened, which, of course, I didn't do any of this in the moment. This was all later. But the library instruction can sometimes look very brief from the outside, which it is, a one-shot session, a workshop. But I feel like beneath that encounter, when you reflect and really look at it, there's a lot of care, adjustment, and yes, even craft. And then Adrienne Maree Brown's Emergent Strategy really, again, gave me permission to see myself as an educator and to allow my expertise to come through, which I think we all struggle with as beginning teachers. but being like water really resonated with me. That I can prepare carefully, of course, that's never going to change. That's a librarian in me, but I need to remain flexible. Have a good lesson plan, but allow myself to respond to what's happening in the classroom in the moment. So I hope my chapter invites other librarians to see their teaching as meaningful craft work, responsive, relational, imperfect, and but deeply caring. Because I think the work that we do is really important and really impactful. You know, we might think those one-shot sessions, or we're teaching databases, um, doesn't have an impact, but I do believe it does. So phenomenological reflection, I think, is really important, and allows us to have that experience. So that's all. I hope you all read my chapter and enjoy it. And I will pass it on to Samantha.
Thank you, Stacy. Hi, everybody. My name is Samantha Minnis. I work at Grand Valley State University. I actually work just through that wall from one of our presenters earlier, Mary Ruge. I'm really excited to be here with you today. This has been such a pleasure, as so many of us have said, to write this book and to revisit this work. So I have been a big fan of Adrienne Maree Brown since I think Emergent Strategy came out. I love that book and I love Pleasure Activism, and those are two really important books to me. So when Hazel told me that this book was happening, I managed to horn in and write 2 chapters because I was just too excited. So I'll be talking a little bit about both chapters today. The first one I want to talk about is called Here for It All, Creating Pre-Class Rituals to Embrace the Multiverse Classroom. And Stacy, this revisits a lot of what you talked about as well. I am a chronic over-preparer, and I had quite a long time in librarianship before I became an instruction librarian. And so I think I felt I knew I had skills to draw on from that time previously, but I felt intimidated by instruction. So I'm just going to read a little bit of an excerpt of the beginning of the chapter to set this up. Just before I'm about to teach a class, time seems to slow and stretch. My heart begins to quicken, my senses focus, and I think, I cannot believe I'm about to do this. And then I'm introduced, or the clock ticks to the appointed time, and I say, hi, everybody, and I'm off. I'm doing it. As the class begins, I'm fully in that moment, fully present. It's the point at the top of the roller coaster when you crest the hill and you feel weightless before the first drag of the momentum. There is fear in that moment, but there is also exhilaration. All the planning is done, and there is only me and whomever I am speaking to. Over time, I've come to realize that there's nothing I can do to make myself feel completely prepared for any class. In fact, I have found greater value in being flexible, meeting my students where they are, and working together to create the classroom experience. I bring in my knowledge about libraries, my ideas and plans, and they bring in their own energy and needs. To be an adaptable teacher, I employ the Emergent Strategy principle, less prep, more presence. Because of this, I have come to value the moments before entering the classroom even more than I value the time I have to make long-term preparations. Making sure I'm in the mood I want to be in and that I'm setting intentions for the energy I want to bring into the classroom and how I want the students to feel as they are participating is some of my most important work. So to do that, to really make the best use of those moments right before I teach, I have created a playlist. And I did this long before the chapter. I just always had a playlist. I have playlists for everything, and it helps get me really pumped up. And I created a version of that playlist specifically for this chapter, and it's linked in the chapter, and I've just shared it in the chat, so enjoy. It's very personal to me, so it's a very diverse set of music that probably won't appeal to everybody all the time, but that's okay, because the chapter actually then walks you through how to create your own playlist to prepare for classes yourself. So it asks a series of questions to help generate ideas for different songs that might be useful to you. The other thing I like to do as a pre-class ritual, kind of similar to Stacy again, is like cast a spell or set an intention. And for me, that can look like just thinking about what do I want to bring into the classroom today? What are qualities of myself that I value that I think will be useful to the students? A common one that I use is I am curious, I am kind, I am enthusiastic. And regardless of how the preparation went, I can bring those 3 qualities into the classroom, and I believe those are helpful to the students. So I also have in the chapter a series of questions to help you brainstorm what might be useful to you as you're trying to set an intention to bring into the class. So that's my first chapter. The second chapter that I wrote with a couple of colleagues who weren't able to join us today is a little different, but similarly, I think, exciting. So we decided to do a duo ethnography where the three of us got together over Zoom. We all met when we worked at GV. At the time, we were all working at different institutions. So we had kind of a variety of experiences to bring. And we talked through a few questions related to emergent strategy, actually. And then we took those conversations and we coded them and we looked for themes. And we came up with 3 metaphors. And each of us wrote on a different one of the metaphors of how we related what we found in our conversations back to emergent strategy. So I will read you a little bit of my metaphor, which is life finds a way. Shout out Jeff Goldblum. Okay. One of my favorite images in post-apocalyptic fiction of any kind is the building or urban center that's been overrun by plant life. Sometimes it's subtle, a layer of moss incongruously covering what once was a stack of papers on a desk. Sometimes it's more dramatic, a whole copse of trees growing wild in a shopping mall, squirrels and birds at home in the overstory. For me, these images give a sense of renewal and continuity. The artifice is in decay and nature has found a way to survive. When I looked through our transcripts for themes, I did what I always do and fell back into the comfort of academia. I tried to find weighty themes, the ones that would inform something important about the state of information literacy in our experiences. And I absolutely found those themes and I recorded them. However, without really meaning to, I was recording another theme. While underlining and numbering examples of my serious librarian themes, I sent screenshots of funny transcript errors to my fellow authors. I was smiling at moments when we said hello to each other's cats who had popped up on Zoom. Even though we usually hit record after we finished catching up on our personal lives, there are little bits of friendly conversation hanging on to the beginning of our interviews, like ivy taking hold of mortar between the bricks of our discussion about systems. After I noticed this theme, I went back and looked for it intentionally. I found multiple examples in each of our conversations of how our connections with each other and with other colleagues were what bolstered us during difficult times. Much of what we talked about were the parts of our jobs that were hard, the oppressiveness that can come from working in large institutions and in capitalism generally, all feel like heavy concrete walls around us. Our friendships, our care for each other, the authenticity we were able to demonstrate together are all bright, green, lively plants that have managed to grow anyway. So I'll leave it to you to read the chapter for Shayla and Maya's themes, my coworkers and colleagues who were unable to join us today, my co-authors. But again, I just want to repeat what a joy this has been and what a great way to look at librarianship through a different light and a different lens. And with that, I'll pass the baton to Liana Bain-Lin.
Hey everyone, my name's Leah Bain-Lin. I'm a science and math librarian and an assistant professor at James Madison University in Virginia. And my chapter, which I feel like resonates a lot with some of the things other folks have already talked about, is titled Less Prep, More Presence, Implementing Pattern Teaching in Library Instruction, Lesson Planning to Reduce Stress. So I wrote this chapter during my second year as a teaching and liaison librarian. And I was already doing or beginning to do the work that I talk about in my chapter when I came to the call for proposals for this book. And being at the start of the work and being able to frame it, pair it with emergent strategy was very helpful to me as I did the work as someone who really likes to think about praxis in terms of putting theory into action. I had read emergent strategy in grad school, but I actually reread it when I was considering the call for chapters and also when I was starting this work. And it was really, really helpful for me to find clarity and ongoing drive to continue the work to think about it with this framing of praxis. So in my chapter, I talk about how I transformed my instruction lesson planning practices in the fall of 2024, which was my second year as a librarian, using the pedagogical technique known as pattern teaching, which is defined by a scholar, Tully, who you can read my chapter to learn more about. But pattern teaching is basically where you're developing a regular pattern or structure for your classes as an instructor that helps the instructor know when they're done preparing for their upcoming class. And this helps instructors find a little more peace of mind in their prep and some more time back in their day. So I initially learned about this strategy of pattern teaching from a conference session that I attended at the 2024 TILC, the Innovative Libraries Classrooms Conference, where 3 librarians, Alyssa Archer, Lisa Dinkel, and Barbara Tate, presented a conference session on how they were using pattern teaching in their team together at Radford University, where they all were at that time. And then when I was working on this chapter, I actually ended up interviewing them all via email, and including excerpts of their interviews throughout my chapter as section headers of sections in my chapter to honor their voices and their immensely helpful influence on me and on this practice and mindset shift that I was making in my lesson planning throughout the summer and fall of 2024. I was really grateful to be able to continue to learn from them after the conference was over through these interviews and also be able to feature their wisdom and voices in the chapter. And Leah and Hazel were super great with like working with me, figuring out how to structure that and get it all in there. So thank you. I'm gonna super briefly share my screen because there's two images that I thought it was so cool to see my own messy handwriting and brainstorming in the chapter. So figure one shows the document that I actually made during the conference session, as this is my like very initial brainstorming on what pattern teaching could look like for me. And then later that summer, you're getting a preview of my chapter, how I talk about redoing the activity. I redid this, and figure two was kind of my guiding document for fall of 2024, while I was implementing pattern teaching in my own practices. So I also was digging deeper into the literature. There are some other scholars of teaching and learning that have written about this. Another scholar who was really influential, Chakravarti, kind of like reframed the goal from being done with lesson planning to being ready to teach. And I found that to be super productive and helpful for me in terms of preparing lesson plans, using pattern teaching, feeling confident going into the classroom, not like wasting time or stress over preparing. So I talk a lot about this in the chapter broadly, but also I share some specific lesson pattern blocks that I built and that I still use a lot. So you'll have to check it out to see all of the different things that I've implemented, but many of the things I still actively use and really enjoy using in my teaching 2 years later. Now, so my overall goal with the work was to achieve less prep and more presence. And yeah, as I said, I still use many of the same strategies and feel like I have basically more or less achieved that goal now as I'm going into my 4th year of teaching, which was amazing. The chapter was written in an autoethnographic inquiry model where I took systematic notes on my work and interviewed myself at different points in the semester about my experience of doing the work. And so in the chapter, I also reflect on the like challenges and the opportunities or aha moments that arose in doing autoethnographic systematic self-research for the first time. And I found that never a failure, always a lesson really resonated with me as I did that part of the work for this chapter. During a very busy season of work and life. And I just wanted to briefly read from my conclusion section to kind of share like my outcomes and my next steps on this work. So transformation doesn't happen in a linear way, at least not one we can always track, Brown writes. It happens in cycles, convergences, explosions. If we release the framework of failure, we can realize that we are in iterative cycles, and we can keep asking ourselves, how do I learn from this? So how did I learn from this work in this chapter? I learned from the literature, from other librarians, and from my own experience that this is the kind of teacher I want to be, the kind of teaching librarian that I want to be. Confident and ready for class, eager to focus on and center my students' voices in their own learning, and flexible enough with my lesson plans that class can be as helpful for my students as possible. Of course, there were some courses where I couldn't fully transform the lessons to follow my patterns or things went awry, but overall the mindset shift of pattern teaching positively impacted the time spent and stress spent on lesson planning prep and gave me a roadmap for more human connection in the classroom. So I plan to continue adapting and implementing the best parts of my finding from this experiment when possible, and to continue iterating what doesn't quite work out. And I plan to continue striving to be a better teacher and to implement the people first, change always principles of emergent strategy, and to always focus on doing the right work, imperfect and iterative though it may be. Thank you all so much. This was just a joy to work on, and I am really excited to introduce Charlie, who's the next author.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. So now all I want to do is just go read the book and skip this presentation. I'm really looking forward to getting the finished volume. My chapter was called Students on the Mic, Active Engagement in Podcast Composition Instruction. So I took the tack of trying to get into detail about 2 activities that I use in my audio scholarship composition one-shot instruction session in an attempt to get the students engaged and to give them some ownership and investment in the process. So when I read, there is a conversation in the room that only these people in this moment can have, find it in the original proposal, or the call for proposal, excuse me, it clicked. Oh, I understand a way to describe what I've been trying to do. Very short history. All this is in the chapter, so I'll just say I do a radio show at the Georgia Tech Library, where I am the public engagement librarian. I don't know if I said that. And because I do a radio show and work in podcasting, I've been asked to give sessions in classes where English teachers want their students to do a group project and create a podcast. And when they realize I don't know how to make a podcast, how do I tell them to make one? They call me. So I bring them a one-shot session to get the students up to speed. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's multimedia instruction. Here's how you use the tools. Here's how to think about the form. And so trying to avoid a step-by-step instruction session or here's a list of things you have to watch out for, I really want student engagement. I really want to pull from them something that will make the class interesting to them and also to me. Because I mean, it's a very selfish thing to want to be in the moment and a little scared in the class. So there's two activities. One is where I get a student to come up and speak into the microphone. I record them and then edit their audio live so the students can see it on the audio editor. That's usually really fun because I get to grab every and say, here's an and then play it and then cut it. And the other thing is a discussion of how to treat audio composition as a creative act and understand the underlying aesthetic mission statement. So both of those activities, I bring the students in, and you can read the chapter and get all the details. So I'm just going to read the start of my conclusion from using this teaching style. Using creative and iterative design techniques for active engagement has made me more aware of the students' attention, insecurity, and curiosity. My teaching style, never completely formal, has come to resemble stand-up comedy in a few aspects. I don't tell jokes and I don't prioritize laughter above comprehension, but I do consider the session to be an experience that the students and I are creating together in the moment from the starting point of rehearsed material. I have even had to deal with a heckler or two. Those two audience participation sections do not always go well. Sometimes I cannot make the recording come together. Sometimes the students improvise themselves into a hypothetical podcast that feels uninteresting even before we create an aesthetic. And sometimes no one finds the John Spencer Blues Explosion soundtracking a discussion of biscuits amusing. The results, however, are well worth that danger. It can make a memorable, unique class session, and the nature of the exercises requires me to be present, engaged in the exercise, and paying full attention to the students. I can never phone it in when I have to create a mini work on the spot. And writing the chapter got me to understand that about what it was that I was finding interesting or what it was that was compelling me about the course. So I'm really grateful for that chance to explore this through a lens that I did not have until I read the call for proposals. So thank you very much for giving me that chance. I'm also looking forward to reading all these other chapters because it turns out I went very practical and a lot of people went theoretical or very emotional, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that whole package all together. I want to hand it off to the next author now, Mai Lu.
Hi, everyone. I am loving this format and I'm learning so much. I'm scribbling down notes about different things that I want to incorporate into my practice. And when Charlie introduced himself with the podcast, I was like, wait a minute, I've been on that podcast, Lost in the Stacks. It's an awesome podcast. It was about a program a leadership program that I was in. Anyhow, separate from that, we're here to talk about this chapter. Hi, everyone. My name is Mai Lu, and I co-authored a chapter called Oak Trees, Experiences and Reflections on Emergent Strategy. My co-authors are Reese Steinberg, Arvind Kang, and Samantha Kruger. We're all librarians and archivists from the Toronto area here in Canada. And our collaboration actually began as a presentation for a teaching and learning program conference in Canada. We were kind of just talking about different experiences we had at the reference desk, in classrooms, in libraries. And then when we saw the call for publication for this chapter, and read Emergent Strategy, we saw all these parallels to what we're already doing, and then how these anecdotes can help out. So we used the analogy of oak trees, and at first we're like, wait a minute. But as we were collecting all of our different stories, our poems, our sketches, comics, we found that oak trees kind of was our the thread, the connecting thread. And oak trees grow tall and strong, but their strength lies in their adaptability, their flexibility, and their community. So we kind of organized our chapter in 3 parts. We zoom into the oak tree in the first part, and we learn the way. If you were to take a cross section of an oak tree and see all the rings, we saw that as the different ways that we learn, and that shows in our growth. So that evoked never a failure, always a lesson strategy. When we zoom out on oak trees and we lose the individual trees, but we see the forest, and then that is the community that we work in. The big picture of librarianship kind of evoked the less prep, more presence principle. And then when we were reflecting on how, as we talked about, like learning is change, how oak trees survive and thrive during storms, we thought about how when oak trees are under pressure, they adapt, they bend, they sway. They don't snap the way other trees may because they have a very deep root system. They interconnect with one another, the roots, and that allows them to sway with storms so that they can be more resilient. And we were thinking about how we could learn a lot from the mighty oak in our profession when we're looking at when we're encountering different storms. And that made us think of change is constant, be like water, or in our case, be like an oak tree. And the excerpt that I'm going to share with you today is on teaching resilience, not perfection. And it's about the perfect example. When we go into a class and we're going to do a demonstration of searching, we have a tendency to seek out the perfect example, the perfect topic, which will allow instructors to highlight how to extract keywords, determine synonyms, refine search results with filters, and reveal the appropriately sized set of search results that are both relevant and meet all the criteria for the assignment. And these ideal topics might be very comforting for us because they evoke a world that is orderly, deductive, and follow the rules of library searching. However, only using ideal topics can be problematic because they may mislead students into thinking that this is what research is like. It's going to be orderly, it's going to be deductive, and it's going to follow all these rules, when in reality, it may not. When students are trying this out from themselves and they start to run into different challenges, they may take it on themselves thinking that, like, I'm doing something wrong because in the demonstration, it didn't go like this, so I must be screwing up somewhere. And that's not good for their confidence. It's not good for their mental health. It's not good for their wellness in general. So if we were to flip that, in reality, research is messy. Like, let them know that research is messy. Research often has more stops and starts. It looks more like a bowl of cooked spaghetti where it's just an intertwining set of noodles where you don't really know where one ends and one begins, as opposed to the uncooked package of spaghetti where it's like uniform lines. They're all the same length. They're all the beautiful stacks of organized shelves that we love so much. But research, it starts, it twists, it turns, it sometimes feels like it's moving backwards, but with hard work, with determination, with persistence, we can get to the finish line. And being transparent about some of those challenges, it requires a level of vulnerability for library instructors. Starting searches where instructors don't know where it can end can be very frightening, but it can build trust. It's moving at the speed of trust. And when students try to apply the different things that they've learned in this instruction session, and they come across these different challenges, they can remember, oh yeah, this is normal. The instructor also, and this is how they remedied them. This is how they got past it, and I can do that too. So oak trees don't grow in perfect conditions. They don't require a perfect set of criteria linked with Boolean operators like sunlight and bracket, fall, rainfall, or watering, close bracket. Oak trees experience unpredictable weather, and instead of remaining rigid, oak trees bend and sway in storms, and this allows them to be more resilient when facing storms, and library instructors can teach students similarly to sway in the face of storms. Um, so when my co-authors and I were writing this chapter, we were so excited about the opportunity to bring in some creativity, to include drawings and poems. And so you're going to hear a bit about the Raptors in their playoff run. You're going to hear about so it is quite it was a very enjoyable experience. So thank you to Hazel and Leah for bringing us all together to do this. And I'm like Charlie, I'm so looking forward to reading this book because I'm so inspired by all of the other things that have been shared thus far. And I will move on to our last but not least presenter. Liz, you're up.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Chenevi. I'm a health and behavioral studies librarian in Virginia. And I did my chapter with at the time, undergraduate social work student that I had worked with, Jade O, and my colleague, Elaine K, who is an instructional designer. When Leah emailed me about this book, I was very excited and honored, and I knew I wanted to do some kind of conversational piece. And my first thought was to work with Jade because they, like I said, we're an undergrad student who had reached out to me to talk about emergent strategy at a suggestion of their professor, who knew the professor and I had bonded over Adrienne Marie Brown as well. Side note about Jade, they had the incredible opportunity to moderate a Q&A with Adrienne virtually for a queer teach-in that our institution did a few years ago. And so I knew I wanted to try to talk with them to get the student perspective as a student who'd been through several sessions with me. And we had formed this relationship outside of the classroom. But it was summer and I wasn't sure if they would reply to my email in time. And so I also asked my colleague Elaine if she would maybe want to collaborate because we had also, we both use a lot of emergent strategy in our work. And luckily Jade enthusiastically responded. And so then I thought it'd be really interesting to have a conversation between the three of us to get the student perspective, so the learner in the classroom, the librarian perspective of the person in the classroom doing the actual teaching, and then the instructional designer perspective of someone who's maybe not in the classroom, but is kind of thinking about teaching and learning and kind of from a more holistic outside the classroom space. So we had a Zoom conversation that we recorded, and we really leaned into there is only a conversation that these people in this moment can have, find it. We veered from information literacy some, and I tried to veer us back, but I think it was a really wonderful conversation to kind of just learn more about what our students are thinking about and how they fit into the institution and how we all fit into the institution together. So I'm going to try to read quickly. I want you to hear from all three of us since it's literally a transcript. So I'm going to try to read my part pretty quick, but I want you to hear from Jade and Elaine. So this is an excerpt from our chapter, An Emergent Conversation. So Liz, so a big thing I tell students all the time is that we're learning it together. So when you come to my office later and I'm helping you find sources for your paper, sure, I'm the expert on how to navigate the information landscape, but I'm not a social worker. So the student is the content expert in the room, and that every single interaction, even though the strategies might be the same, ends up looking different with every single student because every single student's needs are going to be a little bit different. So we're figuring out this process together and learning together. I tell students to kind of let go of my authority in the room, which is a really hard thing for faculty to do. They panic at the idea of losing authority in the room. But I'm just here to facilitate you through this process. My longer term goal is building that relationship so that when you do need support, you know who to ask and how to ask, and we can have a symbiotic relationship. I love sitting with students and figuring out what it is that they're interested in and want to learn about. And I learn cool things from them and from the research process that we embark on together. I think it's a huge benefit of where librarians sit in this weird hierarchy in the institution, that we can more easily let go of that authority piece and build those authentic relationships with students that exist outside of the classroom and have nothing to do with a grade. And that we can then navigate this really overwhelming landscape together in each interaction, which I think is my favorite part of my job. Jade, even the concept of libraries to begin with is such a socialist type of thing. So I think that's why, for me, I think Liz and I were able to even connect, because I also had this interest in building and fostering this type of relationship. And I have that with a lot of the faculty that I'm pretty close to. I guess some people might think it's a bit peculiar that I'm friends with my professors, but it's helped me a lot. I wouldn't have been able to see and analyze the political landscape of the university if I didn't have these connections. But personally, I feel it's intentional that these hierarchies are put into place and reinforced at universities in general. Elaine, I'm glad to hear that you do have these personal ties and connections. When you talk about an experience, I feel like I'm looking at it through a mirror or something, like the faculty gap where they are. And I work with a lot of faculty from across campus, but something that I hear often, and this goes back to what Liz was saying about the authority piece, is, faculty, when we're working with them sometimes and we ask, well, why can't you try this? It does take them time for them to be able to have this idea of getting permission to not do it the way they thought they were supposed to do it. So it'd be interesting to know more about who those faculty are that connect and are able to have those kinds of relationships with students, and why and how that happens. And I just think you're absolutely right. And the faculty feel this too, that the power structures of the university and the expectations that are put upon them aren't conducive, even when they want to build relationships like that. And that gets back at some of our comments about trust. So thinking about an emergent strategy, Brown provides tools about thinking about interdependence and decentralization that are kind of interesting. Circling back to holding space, I'm thinking specifically about a crafting event that I support, that is a time for faculty and students to sit down together and make things and talk. We just don't have enough of that, where you get an opportunity to just be together, not as these students and those faculty. We're just people together. And so our conversation, we structured as a spiral, and starting and ending with Jade's perspective, the student perspective in particular. And then we ended the piece with some reflection questions, both for librarians to consider in their instruction settings, and then also to possibly give to students to help them think about their research from this kind of emergence space. So I'm incredibly grateful to have been asked to be in this book and alongside all of you. And I'm really, really, really excited to get the book and read all of your pieces. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, everybody. We completely understand that we're at time, so if you have to pop off, go ahead. But if anybody had any conversation you wanted to have with each other or a question to ask, we are not time limited in the same way. So go ahead and chat amongst yourself if there's anything anybody else wants to say. Or Hazel?
Well, I just want to say thank you. This is so incredible. Like, I feel when you guys say, can't wait to see the book, I'm like, I've seen the book. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And it's so cool to be here. Liz, to quote, I think your colleague, we're just people together, right? And it's like so special to hear all these different takes and all these different vantage points. And Charlie, you mentioned the variety of, like, there are really practical things and then there are really theoretical things. And that was one of the things that we really wanted, is to get all these different approaches, all these different voices. So it's just so lovely to hear y'all today.